The US midterms are just over a week away. The Democrats are trying to swing voters in Republican states by promising the restoration of abortion rights. In some states, abortion is banned in all circumstances unless the mother's life is in danger, and Texas is one of those states. Laura Jays joins us live from San Antonio right now. Laura, hello.
Good to see you, Kenny. Well, this is the first election since abortion was effectively banned across the state of Texas. There was that decision in the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade. It was overturned. That effectively recognised abortion as a constitutional right. Now that is no longer. It overturned 50 years of precedent. Here in the state of Texas, well, it is in the state's hands now. And quickly after that decision, well, Texas swiftly shut down its abortion clinics. You cannot even get an abortion in Texas in the cases of rape or incest. Effectively, the only way you can get an abortion is if the mother's life is in danger. Behind these policies, behind the politics of all of this, there are real people. Amanda and Josh are an example of that. They never contemplated having an abortion. They never wanted one until they needed one, and it was almost too late. We'll bring you both sides of this debate, but first, here is Amanda and Josh's story.
Thank you so much for having us. So our experience was in August, on August 23rd, I was about 18 weeks pregnant. And I woke up one morning on that Tuesday and felt as though something was wrong. I was just feeling different than I had been feeling the rest of my pregnancy. And so I contacted my doctor and told her some of the symptoms I was experiencing. And she advised that we come in right away based on some of the symptoms that I was having. So we went in shortly after, and after a very brief examination, she informed us that I had something called cervical incompetency or cervical insufficiency. And essentially what was happening is my cervix was dilating fully, obviously far too early at only 18 weeks. And she told us that we were inevitably going to lose our baby. And so what happened after that was, because of how the laws are written in Texas, we couldn't move forward with labor until either the baby's heart stopped beating or I became so sick that my life was considered in danger. And so it took about 3.5 days until I did in fact get so sick that my life was considered in danger. And at that point, I was permitted to give birth.
That was just heartbreaking to hear. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. So what did the doctors tell you? Did you need a medical abortion, but they couldn't give it to you?
My understanding is that if we lived in a state where the laws were different, or if the law in Texas hadn't so recently been enacted, they would have been able to induce labor before I got so sick that my life was considered critically at risk. But they weren't allowed to induce labor, again, because of the way the law is written, because our baby's heart was still beating.
Amanda and Josh, we put your circumstance to one of the pro-life advocates here in Texas. And she put to me that it was doctors that didn't understand the law. What do you say to that?
We know that that's not true. Our healthcare team was in favor of giving Amanda the immediate access that she wanted. The healthcare team wanted the same thing that we did. That's simply not true that the doctors didn't understand the law. We know that these laws were written intentionally vague in such a way that the hospitals and institutions around the state are scared to allow their doctors and teams to perform the needed healthcare.
And we know in those couple of days, our healthcare team had to ask the ethics board at the hospital whether they could provide care, and the ethics board told them no. And in conversations since with my OB, she has told me that she has reached out to many of her colleagues, both within and outside the state of Texas, and she's gotten the same response from all of her colleagues that she's spoken to, that they would have done the same thing because of the way the law is written and how they understand them.
Wow. Amanda and Josh, what has this done to you?
Well, physically, we don't know yet. So we know that I had a vast amount of scar tissue as a result of the infection that was brought on from the weight. I had to have surgery about a week and a half ago to get that removed. That surgery, as far as we know, was successful, but we won't know still for another couple of weeks whether I can carry my own children again. It's going to be more tests and more procedures and more time before we know that for sure. And emotionally, mentally, I mean, I don't think you can measure the toll that it's taken.
I can see that in both of your faces, and it's just heartbreaking to see. Here, it's such a divided issue, not just in Texas, but across the United States. I don't assume to know where you both stand on the issue, but you've been through something so big. What is your view now of the laws as they stand?
I think both of us feel very strongly that the discussion around an unplanned pregnancy, neither one of us have any sort of stigmatism towards someone who feels that that's the right decision for them is to abort an unwanted pregnancy. But one thing that we feel very strongly about right now is that we need to raise awareness so that people like the pro-life person that you spoke to understand that there's a difference between having access to life-saving healthcare treatment during a pregnancy that has already gone wrong. And in our case, Amanda, her life was in danger. She developed sepsis. It's one of the leading causes of maternal mortality. So by not getting the treatment that she needed, her life was at risk. And so we're trying to divide these two issues right now, not saying one is more important than the other, but one feels maybe more relatable to other people.
Yeah, and it's not like you had that much time, as I understand your experience. I mean, you didn't even really have the option to leave the state and get that health care?
That was another actually kind of traumatic and scary thing to think about. Was we live in Austin, Texas. It's in the middle of one of the biggest geographical states. It's about an 8-hour drive to leave the state. It's further complicated by most of the neighboring states have already outlawed abortion in a similar fashion. And we knew one of the major risks in Amanda's condition was that without any amniotic fluid, it was likely that she would develop sepsis. Sepsis can come on very quickly, as it did with Amanda. So we didn't feel like taking the risk of being in the middle of the desert with a life-threatening condition was the right choice to make. So we didn't feel travel was an option.
We've since been told that sepsis can go from, a seemingly healthy person to death in as little as an hour. And so, had we made that decision to get in our car or get on a plane and try to get to another state, I don't know that I would be sitting here having this conversation with you now.
Well, thank you so much for having the conversation with us. It's such an important part of this debate at the moment, and that's exactly what it is, and we wish you the very best. I think you'll be wonderful parents.
Thank you so much.
We're looking forward to it.
So as you just heard there from Amanda and Josh, they say their doctor was bound by the law. They even went to the ethics board. Leaving the state was absolutely not an option for them, and they couldn't get an abortion until it was almost too late, and Amanda was very sick. As you're about to hear from pro-life groups like the Texas Alliance for Life, they say it's the doctor's fault that they don't understand the law here. Here's Amy O'Donnell.
Now, there seems to be some measure of misunderstanding in Texas with some doctors who don't understand or aren't educated on what our laws say. And I want to believe it's one of those things, because I want to believe that doctors in Texas aren't playing games with women's lives. Because the reality is that Texas law
don't understand the law. That's terrifying.
Texas law is very, very clear that abortion, that these things are not considered abortion. It's spelled out in the statute, in the Health and Safety Code, that a miscarriage is not considered an abortion, miscarriage treatment or care. An ectopic pregnancy treatment or care is not considered abortion. And additionally, there is a life of the mother exception that clearly states that if the mother's life is in danger or she faces risk of major bodily impairment, then the doctor can intervene. These are clearly stated. We know words matter. The words are in the statute. The words are in the law. So when I see some of these stories that we're seeing, and I'm not familiar with the one you're mentioning specifically, I think if I were to have a doctor who were that uneducated on Texas laws, that they didn't know how to treat me or didn't know what constituted a medical emergency, or that they could treat my miscarriage or ectopic pregnancy because they didn't understand the law, I would run as fast as I could to find a doctor who is better educated on what Texas laws say, because they're very, very clear.
Texas also doesn't support abortions even in the case of rape or incest. This is something that I think it's hard for women the world over, in Australia perhaps, I don't wish to verbal them, to get their head around. Why not?
Rape is horrific. It is one of the worst violations any person can face, male or female. We know it happens to both. In the case of a woman being raped and a child being conceived, when that happens, there are two victims. There is the woman, and then there is the unborn child. And we don't believe that the child should have to pay for the father's crime. And we don't believe that violence is ever an answer for violence. And we consider abortion to be a very violent act. And so what we advocate for in those situations is for the woman to choose life, and to find help in these various resources available in raising that child, or if she so chooses, in placing that child in a loving home for adoption.
But I mean, it's not just advocacy, is it? Because it's prevention, really, when it comes to Texas. There's no option.
No option.
If you are raped and you become pregnant by or incest, there is no other option, though, is there, in Texas?
There shouldn't be another option, because it's wrong to discriminate on any person anywhere based on how they came into being. And to discriminate against a child conceived in rape is still discrimination. And it's deeming that life less valuable or less worthy because of something that brought them about that was completely outside of their choosing. That child still is a child worthy of life, and we advocate for that child.
You've once described Joe Biden as an abortion extremist?
Yes.
Why?
Let's just look at everything he says and does on the issue. Even after the overturning of Roe with Dobbs, and the Supreme Court clearly saying there is no constitutional right to abortion. That was judicial activism. It was wrongfully decided. And as in the cases that we've seen throughout history where they've made the decision to overturn precedent and to not deem stare decisis the final say, but they look at it with fresh eyes and they say they got it wrong and we're going to get it right. Those cases that we've seen that unfold in our history, we're so grateful that they overturned injustice to bring forth justice. And that is that the power to legislate abortion should stand with the voters and their elected representatives. Should be a state-by-state conversation, a state-by-state issue. Before Roe legalized abortion, many states had abortion restrictions on the books. It was out of touch with the vast majority of voters in vast majority of states in 1973. And it's out of touch with many of them now. That's why we're seeing state after state after state enact restrictions, because that reflects the voters' wishes. In light of that, Dobbs has really moved President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris to try every means possible to circumvent the laws. They've tried to say that there is a right where there's not a right. That's been clearly stated by the Supreme Court, whose job is to interpret the Constitution. There is no constitutional right to abortion. They've tried to circumvent state laws and federal laws on the books by saying that Veterans Affairs should provide abortions, that with the EMTALA Act, that hospitals have to provide abortions outside the exceptions or the laws in states. Those are violations of laws. They are violating laws to try to take life because they value abortion above helping women carry their babies to term, giving birth, or placing those babies for adoption if that's their choice. So instead of advocating, we want to help you. We want to help you with your pregnancy. We want to support you. We want to figure out what we can do. All they seem to harp on, like a broken record, like it's their one talking point, is we are pro-abortion on demand at taxpayer expense, and who cares what the laws say? Nobody is above the law. But it's extreme. President Biden is a pro-abortion extremist, and his views and Vice President Kamala Harris's views are out of step with the vast majority of voters.
Some might say that your views are out of step as well, Amy. This seems like one of the most divisive issues in this country right now. Do you think there can ever be a middle ground?
Well, to those who perhaps would say that I'm out of step, let's look at what all the states are doing. I'm one of millions of voters in the state of Texas. Regardless of what I do here, my vote counts as one vote. We're still pro-life, and life is protected from conception on. Clearly, my views aren't out of step with the vast majority of Texas voters. If we look at states across the nation who are enacting restrictions after restriction after restriction after restriction to protect life, that's a lot of voters. The left wants to paint us who are protecting life as extreme, but yet they're ignoring the polls who are showing the vast majority of voters do not agree with their views and where they land. The extremists are the people who don't value life and who advocate for the taking of it despite what people wish, despite what the voters say. And the polls say abortion on demand at taxpayer expense is the only thing that they'll go for. And they're losing voters over it.
Well, you put a lot of money into pro-life candidates. If it was to change Congress, the makeup of Congress, and if you could change laws in Congress, how much further would you go? What else needs to be done in this space, do you think?
Our organization would fully support a national ban on abortion. We would support any national law that protected life at a greater measure.
Well, there you have it. But pro-life advocates argue that the abortion issue is not even one that is biting at this midterm election because the things like inflation, interest rates, the general cost of living is taking over. That said, they put millions upon millions of dollars into the campaigns of pro-life Republican candidates. So if there is to be that red wave in Congress where Republicans do hold the balance of power in both the House and the Senate, you can expect that there would be a push to expand the pro-life platform. And as you just heard there, Kenny, it might include expanding the banning of abortion nationwide.
It's eye-opening, isn't it? All right, Laura Jays, thanks so much, live from San Antonio.